The Apostle Paul writes to his friends in Corinth, "Do you not realize that although all the runners in the stadium take part in the race, only one of them gets the prize? Run like that to win." Every athlete concentrates completely on training, and this is to win a wreath that will wither, whereas ours will never wither. So that is how I run, not without a clear goal, and how I box, not wasting blows on thin air. I punish my body and bring it under control to avoid any risk that, having act as a challenge to others, I myself might be disqualified. The late Irma Bombeck had an interesting view of skiers. Everyone talks about joggers being fanatics about their sport, but beside skiers, they seem almost lucid. Skiers are really weird people. Who else would pick a pastime where you select the most inaccessible place in the country that is going through the worst weather of its history, spend 2 treacherous days getting there, strap 2 planks of slippery wood on your feet, ride to the top of a mountain, and try to get down without the help of the ambulance waiting at the bottom? Money is exchanged for this. I'm married to a ski person who has astounded me. He will ski for 8 hours until his feet are numb, his mind is confused, and the hairs in his nose break off. And I've seen them all, hobbling around on crutches and sporting a cast like a Medal of Honor, crazies getting in one last run before the blizzard closes the lift. I'll be honest with you, I wouldn't want my daughter to marry one. But the current Pope was a skier, and it occurs to me that the Apostle Paul would probably have been one. In a flurry of mixed metaphors in his letter to his friends in Corinth, he describes life as a foot race, as a boxing match, and a little later on as a military campaign. And I have no doubt he would have added the slopes had he lived in a different climate. Because for Paul, real life, if it is anything at all, is a struggle, a battle, a fight. A struggle, a battle, a fight against what? I punish my body and enslave it. What does that feel like to you? What kind of battle is he talking about? Well, I ask you, is it not true that we all, in some measure at least, experience life as an inner war between competing sides of ourselves? Between self-indulgence on the one hand and self-sacrifice on the other. Between safety and comfort on the one hand, and risk and adventure on the other. Between complacency on the one hand and push to grow on the other. Between the urge to take it easy and vegetate on the one hand, and the urge to stretch and struggle on the other. Tommy Lasorda, the baseball great, knew what Paul was talking about. He writes, "I took a pack of cigarettes from my pocket, stared at it, and said, 'Who's stronger, you or me?' The answer was me. I stopped smoking. Then I took a martini and I said to it, 'Who's stronger, you or me?' Again, the answer was me. I quit drinking. Then I went on a diet. I looked at a big plate of linguine with clams and said, 'Who's stronger, you or me?' And a little clam looked up at me and said, 'I am.' I punish my body. Whatever the specific trial or temptation, momentous or trivial, this inner struggle, which we all know something about, for some measure of self-control, self-discipline, is the very essence of any authentic human life. Robert Browning, "When the fight begins within himself, a man then is worth something. God stoops over his head, Satan looks up between his feet, and both pull. And he's left in the middle, and the soul awakens and begins to grow." In a sense, this is what the civilizing process is all about. We're born creatures, check them out, thoroughly dominated by bare need, desire, impulse. And growing to be civil and useful human beings involves struggle to keep these impulses in line and in their place against the demands and values of reality, of life together. C. Fitzsimmons Allison, a philosopher, said it graphically, "While yet infants, we must learn to share toys and take turns. And at Christmas, our fingers are peeled off the toy car, which belongs to a cousin, and we painfully and tearfully begin to learn about ownership and property, and that we must wash our hands and face, that we must set the table, that we must not talk with a full mouth, that we must take out the garbage, we must do our homework, we must not beat up on little brother, and all other sorts of things that are not particularly happy. Our entire educational system is built, or should we say once was, on the premise that learning to be a productive, contributing member of society involves learning to do many things that we do not like to do. Sitting in one place for even 20 minutes without moving, concentrating on symbols, moving across a page of paper to the exclusion of the birds singing outside the window or the chatter of the neighbor in a seat next to us, is an unnatural act. It is a battle, not only between teacher and student, but within that young body and mind, a battle for self-discipline, for self-mastery. And where the war is not won, education does not happen. It occurs to me, nor by the way does real worship happen. Sitting in rows quietly without fidgeting or falling asleep for a whole hour is not something you're born with. Life is race, fight, struggle for self-control, but have not many in our society resolved this internal conflict by surrender? Garrison Keillor describes the change that's taken place in Lake Wobegon over the years. As often happens, he writes, when great victories are won, all that the victors fought for quickly fade away. Absolute adherence to the truth is easier for people in remote rural areas where they recognize one another. But as the roads improved, extending the opportunities for sin, nobody gave a fig any longer about the recognition issue. It was dead as a mackerel in the moonlight. Soon alcohol snuck in by the back door, and half the Lutherans were snitching a beer here or there. And in the 20s, dancing came back, and after World War II, all the strict rules of observance of the Sabbath were forgotten. And then television arrived, and it was all over. Well, I'm quoting. More seriously, one social critic writes, life for too many has become the good, godless, gregarious pursuit of a good time. I have seen the future, and it plays. Fun morality has replaced goodness morality, which stressed interference with impulses. Now, not having fun is an occasion for self-examination. What is wrong with me? I'm not having fun. Even the church runs the danger of reflecting this drift of our culture, drawn into the game of soothing rather than sacrifice, comfort rather than challenge. Someone has commented that much of the Christianity of our days is like one of those football games we're all going to watch this afternoon from the comfort of our sofas, where there are 22 on the field desperately in need of a rest, watched by 60,000 in the grandstands desperately in need of exercise. But for Paul, real life is not so much rest, although that's important, as it is race. Not so much fun, although that is important, but fight. Not so much the beach, but battle. Why? He tells us to avoid any risk that having acted as a challenge to others, I myself might find myself disqualified. So what is it that he proclaims that requires a rather strenuous approach to life? What is it about his message that demands self-discipline? Well, Paul's message is quite simple. God loves you, just as you are, with all your warts, bad habits, flaws, failures, young or old, male or female, bright or not so bright, just as we sit here this morning quite unfinished, hardly models of humanity. He nevertheless dotes on us, affirms us, cares about us with a faithfulness and a passion quite beyond belief. So what does this very nice word have to do with a call to battle? Sounds more like a call to settle back and bask in the love of God, doesn't it? But Paul's inner experience is this. It is precisely this message about our infinite worth in the eyes of God that moves us to become more than we are. The love of God is one big push to join the fight against everything in us and the world around that stands against the love of God. The thing that gets us into the battle of life, or rather that gets us in the battle of life, that again and again attempts us to give up, is the sense that we can never really pull it off. No matter how hard we try to be bigger, better, braver, we always seem to come up short, feel guilty, defeated. No matter how we struggle to be kinder, more helpful, more giving, we always end up shy of our expectations and a bit down on ourselves. No matter how many New Year's resolutions, 2 weeks later, how you doing? What's the use of beating our head against stubborn human nature? Flip on the TV. But you see, this word about the love of God in Christ is the word that you don't have to pull it off today by sunset. All you have to do is keep up the fight. You don't have to manage perfection tomorrow. You only have to run in that direction. It's no disaster if you stumble or fall. It's only a disaster if you don't pick yourself up and try again. As a matter of fact, none of us will ever reach the point in this life where we are comfortable with how far we've come. If we do, we're in real trouble. But that's all right, because the presence of God's love is both the forgiveness and the strength to keep going toward what He intends us to be. God loves us just as we are, but He will not leave us just as we are. He leads us to try for a life worthy of Him and worthy of ourselves. A.J. Cronin, busy physician in London, when ill health forced him to give up his practice and go away, denied every other form of activity in the little Scottish village where he landed and where nothing much ever went on. He set to writing. In the beginning it was fun, as a story and characters slowly took shape in his mind, but he'd never written before, so soon the agony set in. He would struggle for hours over a paragraph. He became depressed. Why am I wearing myself out with this endless effort? What's the use of it? I ought to be recuperating. Abruptly, furiously, I bundled up the manuscript and threw it in the trash can. Drawing a sullen satisfaction from my surrender, I went for a walk in the drizzling rain. Halfway down the loch shore, I came upon old Angus, the farmer, patiently and laboriously ditching a patch of the bogged heath which made up the bulk of his land. I drew near and he gazed up at me in some surprise to see me at that time of day, because he knew of my intentions and ambitions, and with that inborn Scottish reverence for letters had tacitly approved of it. When I told him what I'd just done and why, his weathered face slowly changed. His keen blue eyes beneath misted sandy brows scanned me with disappointment and a quaint contempt. Angus was a silent man, so it took a while for him to speak. No doubt you're the one that's right, doctor, and I'm the one that's wrong. He seemed to be looking right to the bottom of me. My father ditched this bog all his days and never made a pasture. I've dug it all my days and I've never made a pasture. But pasture or no pasture, I cannot help but dig, for my father knew and I know that if only you dig enough, a pasture can be made here. Cronin says, I understood. I watched his dogged working figure with rising anger and resentment. I was resentful because he had what I did not, a terrible stubbornness to see the job through at all costs, an unquenchable flame of resolution brought to the simplest, the most arid of duties of life. And suddenly my trivial dilemma became magnified, transformed, until it stood as a touchstone of all human endeavor. It became the time's problem of mortality, the comfortable retreat or the arduous advance without any prospect of reward. Well, the rest you can imagine. I tramped back to the farm, drenched, furious, picked up the soggy bundle from the trash can. I dried it in the kitchen oven, flung it on the table, set to work again with a kind of frantic desperation. Well, you probably have some idea of the rest of the story. The novel he had thrown away, Hatter's Castle, the first of 6 very successful novels, became Book Society selection, translated into 19 languages, dramatized, brought to Hollywood. But Cronin adds this: the lesson goes deeper still. Today, when the air resounds with shrill, defeatist cries, when half our stricken world is wailing in discouragement, I'm glad to remember. In this present chaos, with no shining vision to sustain us, the door may be wide open to darkness and despair, but the way to close that door is to stick to the job that we're doing, no matter how insignificant that job may be, to go on doing it and to finish it. The virtue of all achievement, as known to my old Scot farmers, is victory over oneself. Those who know this victory can never know defeat. I punish my body, enslave it, but to what end? Just the glow of having done it, of having become the sole bodybuilder? Not in this old faith and story. It's always self-acceptance, towards self-mastery, towards self-giving. Discipline in this old story is always finally to the end that we may be abundantly useful. Paul writes to his friends in Galatia, present-day Turkey, that God's gift to us and through us are, among other things, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and above all, self-discipline. Because without it, all the others are weakened and washed away. The late Norman Cousins wrote of his visit to Lambaréné and the great Dr. Albert Schweitzer, the biggest impression I had in leaving Lambaréné was of the enormous reach of one single human being. Yet such a life was not without the punishment of fatigue. Albert Schweitzer made incredible demands upon himself. He was not concerned about attaining perfection, but he was concerned about the pursuit of it. He considered the desire to seek the best and work for the best as a vital part of a real human life. For example, when he sat down to play the piano or the organ, and when he was alone, he might stay with it at hours a time, practicing a single phrase. But he had a stern idea of his own capacity for interpreting Bach, for example, and he felt he had to stretch himself to whatever extent necessary in order to achieve it. No mere obsession. He sought his outermost limits as a natural part of purposeful living and giving. In that connection, I think it is perhaps in the arts where the relationship between sheer gift and personal discipline becomes most transparent. Susan Williams tells of an interview with Loren Hollander, the renowned pianist, who began his concert career as a child prodigy. Holland was a rarity among prodigies in that he lived up to his potential throughout his life. Many children with such extraordinary talent do not. And asked how he explained this, Hollander replied that children with remarkable abilities often feel exempt from the requirements of training and discipline to which ordinary folk must submit. And as a result, their gifts are wasted and lost. But the gifted person is not exempt, Hollander insisted. Such gifts come from God, and the one who receives it has a solemn responsibility to discipline and develop it so that the potential for achievement can be fully realized. Hollander insists, for example, that he made a commitment as a young man never to waste what God had given him. But the reality is we all have gifts. And as Jürgen Moltmann, theologian friend of mine, once said, we all have our art. And for most of us, our art is a life well lived. We have incredible gifts, gifts like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, gifts to give to one another in marriage, family, neighborhood, world. In the strength and forgiveness of God, we discipline ourselves to share these. Think of the meal we are about to remember and celebrate. Down through the centuries for Christians, the meal has always been a moment to reflect on what we yet want to make of ourselves. But think of the meal, think of any meal, in one sense, any meal, sheer gift of a loving, providing God, gift of the kindness and generosity of others, but at the same time, his meal, any meal, the result of untold and unseen labor and sacrifice and faithfulness and discipline, often by people we never even know. So even the meal is a call again to us all to fight the good fight, run the good race, until our day is done.